Welcome back to our study in becoming God's people and looking at and reflecting on some of the background information to the texts that I use week to week. This week we are going into Genesis 6, 7, and 8. I'm kind of trying to chew basically the entire Noah account, focusing in on the first part of it and the last part of it, that is Genesis 6, 5 through 8, and then Genesis 8, 20 and following, where we get the bookends to what happens in the Noah story and what what God is doing and why God is doing that. But for some background and some context, we left last week and humanity was leaving the garden. They had disobeyed God. They had eaten from the tree. They had made themselves kind of the moral compasses by which they governed life. And so they were thrown out of the garden. And now in Genesis 4, we see that Adam, properly called Adam now, and Eve, his wife, have children. Now, there's a lot of questions and a lot of speculation about these chapters, and I don't really want to dwell on things like where did Cain get his wife. These are fun questions. They're interesting questions, but they are in a lot of ways irrelevant to what the Bible is trying to tell us and the story that it's trying to teach us, and they just end up sidetracking us. So what I want to look at as we begin is the fact that Genesis, while we don't do this, Genesis has an internal structure. And the internal structure is to say, these are the descendants of. And when the Bible says these are the descendants of, and there's some debate over whether that begins or ends a section, it's kind of a transition point. We know this. This is a transition point in the text. The first of these is in Genesis 2:4, where we get that after God rested, this is the creation account. The next one of these is in Genesis 6:5. These are the descendants of Noah, and that introduces the story of Noah. So before Genesis 6:5, Genesis 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, verses 1 through 4 are about Adam and his descendants. Now, Adam and Eve have been kicked out of the garden. They've gone out into the world and they've had children. We see that they have 3 children, Cain, Abel, and Seth. Of these 3 children, one is neither good nor evil. That's kind of Abel here. One is good, that's Seth, his line, and one is wicked, that is Cain and his line. This is important because the Noah story maps onto this, where Noah has 3 sons, 3 children. We have Japheth, who is the first. He's kind of neutral, more good than anything, but somewhat neutral. We have Shem, who is the good, and Ham, who is the wicked. And so we're seeing this model replay itself. We are seeing Genesis set up that the person who the story is about has 3 sons. One is good, one is neutral, but tends to be good, and the other one is bad. Now, that's important because what we see in Adam's line, the neutral is eliminated, and so all we have is good and bad. And what Genesis does in chapter 4 is gives us the descendants of Cain, followed by in Genesis 5 the descendants of Seth. This is showing us a parallel. These genealogies are really easy to skip over. They're really easy to just ignore because it's a lot of hard names that just don't mean anything to us, and especially these 2 genealogies where you're getting a lot of just unrealistic numbers. The numbers don't seem to add up. They don't seem to, they just don't make sense. And A lot of Hebrew scholars, a lot of Bible scholars will say that the numbers aren't meant to be taken at face value. They actually have some meaning to them. Scholars disagree on what the meaning is, but they can recognize that they're not meant to be necessarily taken at face value. They are meant to be they are meant to show something more about the text. Now, what we see in Genesis 4 is that Cain kills Abel. We all know this story. Cain kills Abel. He's a rival for some reason. We're not told why Cain killed Abel. We're not told why Abel's sacrifice was good and Cain's was not. We're not told the means by which Cain does anything. We are just simply told that he kills him. And then he has this long interaction with God about what is good and evil and being his brother's keeper and all of these things. So that happens, and then the genealogy kicks in. And one of the things that we are supposed to notice about the genealogy is the seventh generation. And the seventh generation, 7 being a very important number in the Hebrew Bible. 7 is a number of completion. When you finish something, when you complete something, you can use 7 to denote that it's finished. Something like Genesis 1, where God completes the creating process in 6 days, but then on the 7th day rests. That is the completion of the creation saga. That's how the author lets you know that something is final and finished and whole. Well, the 7th generation from Cain is a man named Lamech, and Lamech kills a man. Now, Cain's line starts in murder, and it reaches completion in the 7th generation. It reaches its fulfillment in the 7th generation. The 7th generation is murder. We also see that Lamech has 2 wives, and that he proclaims his own justice. Not only does he kill the man, but unlike Cain, Cain kills a man and then goes to God and talks to God, and God pronounces sentence and justice, and Cain accepts that. By the time we get to Lamech, where evil has crouched at the door and like an animal and pounced on him, Lamech now has 2 wives. This is an important detail. Again, it's an important detail. It sets up that the idea of polygamy and having 2 wives is inherently sinful because it's following after the mentality of Cain. Lamech goes on, kills this man, and then says, I am avenged 70 times. He puts justice in his own hands. He makes himself the arbitrator of right and wrong. This is the Garden of Eden magnified. This is the sin of Adam and Eve magnified to a new level. That's the point. This genealogy traces down 7, and 7 at the 7th generation is the worst. And then there's a few after that to round it off to 10. And then we see, going across to Genesis 5, if we count down 7 generations from Seth, who is meant to replace Abel and be the good descendant who serves God. This is a very cut and dry depiction of good and evil, right and wrong. Again, this is playing off of Genesis 3, but Seth becomes the good as opposed to Cain's evil. When you go down through the genealogies, at the 7th generation, we have Enoch. And Enoch walked with God and was no more because God took him. In other words, Enoch was so righteous, he didn't die. What the Bible is trying to tell you, what the author is trying to tell you in these stories, in these genealogies, is that good leads to God taking the righteous without death interfering, and evil leads to murder and death and a person who justifies himself. Now, what we are seeing is this easy to recognize dichotomy between good and evil, and the Bible wants to set us up. It's also doing something else. This is layers. You might remember that, you remember Shrek, and he talks about how ogres are like onions because they have layers. The Bible is like an onion because it has layers. So on top of this layer, there's also a layer of the Bible saying how bad everything is getting. And it starts with individuals like Adam and Eve, like Cain and Abel. And then by the end of Adam's line, we have in Cain's lineage cities popping up that are governed by descendants of Cain. We notice we don't see cities governed by descendants of Seth. We see cities governed by descendants of Cain. That is, so you have individuals are in the wrong. Now society as a whole is evil. And then we get this curious passage of Genesis 6:1 through 4. And it's a really difficult passage. But we have these beings known as the sons of God. They lust after daughters of men, and so they take them and sleep with them. What the Bible is showing us here is the ultimate corruption of not just humans as individuals, but social structures in cities, all ruled by Cain's descendants, all governed by Cain's descendants, city as opposed to the garden that God created for Adam and Eve. And then even the sons of God are corrupted into power-hungry beings who only take what they lust after. And again, we're not told if these are meant to be angels, like in the apocryphal book of Enoch, or if they are human kings or what have you. I kind of go back and forth on who I think they are. It's a really just strange passage, and I think there's good arguments on a lot of different sides on who these people are. But the point is meant to be that all of creation at this point, when the sons of God themselves are corrupted, all of creation is corrupted and evil. And we know that this is hyperbole. We know that this is hyperbole because, Genesis 6, Genesis 6:5 through 8 tells us that it says all flesh is corrupted, all humanity is corrupted. But we know that's hyperbole because we know that not only is Noah still alive, but Noah's immediate ancestors are still alive. The righteous line is still alive, is still there. In fact, we're told that Methuselah doesn't die until the year of the flood. So when the Bible says all, it's a hyperbolic statement. It is not meant to be taken literally because we know that there are other righteous people besides Noah. Now, this leads to its own set of problems in interpreting the text, and probably more problems than I can get into right here. But it is meant to be taken as a hyperbolic statement. It is not meant to be taken as a literal factual statement that there was not a single human, with the possible exception of Noah, who God found to be righteous. It is meant to be just a caption of the general direction of humanity. So that brings us up to speed that from the time of Noah, or from the time of Adam to the time of Noah, humanity is following two different tracks. One is becoming righteous or staying righteous. One is becoming evil. The evil one seems to be governing, to be ruling, and to be vastly outnumbering the righteous in the fact that they're building cities and the righteous are not. We're given this picture of just a world that is completely corrupt. And so God decides to intervene on behalf of not humanity, certainly not just Noah, but all of creation. God is God is acting on behalf of creation. And so God tells Noah to build a giant chest, a giant wooden chest. Now, I know typically what is depicted is a boat. In fact, the Ark encounter down in Kentucky, they depict this giant boat that is really it's not accurate to the biblical text. What is behind me on the screen is much more accurate to the text. It is a giant chest with a probably a slit. We're not sure if it's like this where kind of the roof has a gap between the roof and the main body of the chest, or if it was some sort of sunlight or something. We're not sure what was there for a window, but it is just a giant chest, and it is important that it is a giant chest and not a boat, because part of the point of the chest is that you can't do anything with a chest. A giant floating chest just floats. It's under no human power. This is a sign of God's provision, that it's not a boat meant to be steered and controlled by humanity. It is not something even that, like in the Ark Encounter picture, and I really should have put one on there and pulled it up right here. It has a keel that would help it stabilize in the water. It's not meant to do any of that. Part of the point is that Noah can't control it. Noah just has to trust and walk into the boat. But Noah is curious. His name means rest. It is a play on words. The name Noah is a play on the Hebrew word for rest, and it is meant to show that somehow humanity, creation, something will rest because of something that happens in Noah's time. It is also curious that Noah is the first person said to be born after Adam dies. Here we have Adam dying and a new Adam being born. The New Testament likes to use that language of new Adam, but here Noah is getting it first. He is the first new Adam. He's the first second Adam, we could say. And this is to show the importance of Noah's time of transition, where all of the corruption that is a result of Adam will be taken care of. But, and this is a huge but, we see there's these little details that remind us that even though God has these wonderful plans for Noah and wonderful plans for humanity, there's corruption within humanity, and God recognizes this in chapter 8. So even though God is trying to restore and redeem creation, humanity is not able to cooperate, and that is going to lead to further problems. In other words, whatever the flood is, it does not solve the problems. There are still issues at play that God does not completely sort out in the flood. And before I go, I do want to talk a little bit about what the flood is and is not. The first thing that we have to say is the flood is not inherently meant to be seen as a physical, global, natural disaster. Not inherently. The Bible is not trying, again, to give us that picture. It is trying to give us a cosmic scope of God unmaking creation. The language used in Genesis 6 is a direct reversal of the language used in Genesis 1. The order of animals and people, the language of deconstruction, the words that are presented are either antonyms of words used in other places in the text, or they are directly the same concepts as Genesis 1. What is happening here is not God coming in and punishing humanity with a giant natural disaster. What the biblical author wants us to read, and again, we've already shown where the biblical author is not above using hyperbole to make a point. What the biblical author wants us to see is God seeing the destruction that humanity is causing to creation. This is in 6:5. That word that is oftentimes corrupt, it's the word that's translated corrupt, is the same word as what is often translated destroy when it talks about God's actions. What is going on is not God coming in and arbitrarily punishing people. God is coming in and speeding up the process. Humanity is destroying the earth. We are bringing sin and corruption into the earth, and what God is doing is saying, okay, this problem needs to be solved, and it is just beyond help. It needs to accelerate to its natural end, restore everything to chaos, and then I'll remake everything. And that's the picture. God is allowing the flood waters, the waters of chaos that were removed at the very beginning of Genesis, to allow for dry land to appear. God is allowing those same waters to return, those same chaos waters to return, and that is covering the earth in a new chaotic waste. It's unmaking creation. And then God, we say a wind comes upon the waters. That's the same word as God's breath and spirit that we see in Genesis 1, where the Spirit of the Lord hovered above the earth. That actually could be translated, the wind of God hovered above the earth. This is the same event that it comes again, and halfway through the flood narrative, this wind blows across. That's God's Spirit drying out the land, is again pushing back the waters of chaos so that dry land can appear, and God is reforming the earth and giving it new purpose. This is why at the end it is appropriate for sacrifice, because God has remade the purpose of the earth. The purpose of the earth is, again, to be a temple. It is to honor and glorify God. And what do you do in a temple? You sacrifice. So what is the first thing Noah does when he comes out of the ark? He sacrifices. This is an important point in the text. It is not simply arbitrary punishment, with the exception of one person who is somehow righteous. This is God remaking creation and needing humans or allowing humans and animals to come back and flourish on a new land that has not been corrupted by the sin of the old world. It is a picture of God's justice, recognizing that human corruption needs to be dealt with. It's a picture of God's love. It's a picture of concern. But it is also a picture of humanity and our unprecedented ability for evil. And that's right where we leave in Genesis 8, and that's where my reflection for the week picks up, is that God is being just and acting justly on behalf of creation. But at the end of the day, Genesis 9 is going to tell a story that human corruption did not end when the world was unmade. Human corruption remains and threatens the world again, so that there's a need for a second response, and this time the response will be different. So that's where Genesis 6, 7, and 8 took me this week. I hope you're enjoying it. There's a link to the reflection in the description. If there are any questions or comments, please feel free to let me know. I'll try to address those as soon as I can. And until next time, thanks and God bless.